The wind was a biting chill across the Baltic coast of Peenemünde, autumn 1944. Beneath the glow of massive floodlights, General Major Dr. Hans Kammler, the architect of the V-2 program, watched the miracle unfold. The air was thick with the scent of liquid oxygen and impending power. Kammler, a man consumed by the SS's doctrine of ruthless efficiency, felt a chilling, absolute confidence. This rocket, the Vergeltungswaffe 2, Vengeance Weapon 2, was the Reich's technological anchor, traveling at over 3,500 miles per hour towards London. The short opening statement, "They believe they are invisible, but no one is invisible to history." Silence held the night until a white pillar of fire erupted from the launch pad, a sound like tearing silk, followed by a thunderous mechanical roar. This weapon represented the culmination of German genius, a final, unanswerable threat designed to break the will of the Allies. For Kammler, the V-2 was not just an achievement, it was the psychological guarantee of German technical exclusivity in the post-war world. He believed the rocket was too complex, too advanced for the Allies to replicate in time. He felt a profound sense of security, believing that even if the Allies won the war on the ground, they could never possess this future technology. Kammler, standing in the cold bunker, felt his heartbeat accelerate like a winning clock. His Mont-Blanc pen was clutched tightly in his hand. But as the rocket vanished, a small error was reported, a strange signal interference from the west. "That is impossible," he muttered. The fault, due to a minor technical glitch, had dropped a vital piece of the guidance system into a remote area of Poland. That was the seed of betrayal. The retention mechanism.
The cost of the V-2
The
success
question
is measured
that
not in
should have
marks,
haunted
but in
the
moral
High
decay.
Command.
What have
What
we become?
drives a nation to commit suicide with 20,000 slave lives to prove its strength when the enemy is about to steal its entire future? The closing statement. The story you are about to hear has never been revealed
Science should
in
have no
any
borders,
official
for
document,
knowledge is the shared
exposing the
heritage of all
scientific
mankind.
intelligence operation that decided the missile race.
The genesis of the V-2 was rooted in Germany's early lead in rocket science, born from the ambition of Wernher von Braun's team at Peenemünde. By 1944, the V-2 represented a colossal expenditure of resources, a 14-ton ballistic missile capable of hitting a city hundreds of miles away with no warning, traveling faster than the speed of sound. This project consumed vast quantities of ethanol, liquid oxygen, and specialized metals, and a disproportionate share of the Reich's dwindling scientific and industrial capacity. The total cost, equivalent to $50 billion in today's
These
money,
fragments, recovered
was
by Polish
comparable
intelligence,
to the
prove the
entire
inertial guidance
U.S.
system is far more
Manhattan
advanced than we
project.
feared.
Yet it
Why
yielded
must this be so
only a
complicated?
tactical
If only
terror
this part was
weapon,
standardized, we wouldn't
not
have these
a
delays.
strategic
It's
war
impossible to mass
weapon.
produce.
The sheer
V-2 is the future
scale
of
of the
warfare.
engineering,
We must prioritize
from
the rocket program
complex
above all else
turbine
if we intend to
pumps
secure
to the
victory.
inertial
We have
guidance
lost more
system,
than just
demanded
territory. We have
absolute
lost our very
precision
will to
and
endure.
highly skilled labor, a scarcity in late war Germany. The strategic doctrine behind the V-2 was purely psychological. The terror bombing of civilian targets, primarily London and Antwerp, designed to shatter civilian morale and force a negotiated surrender. It was not a weapon aimed at military targets or industrial complexes. It was a desperate gamble aimed at the will of the people. This contrasted sharply with the Allied strategic bombing campaign, which was centrally aimed at crippling German war production, fuel synthesis, and transportation networks. The quantifiable effort was immense. Germany diverted roughly 10% of its total steel output to the V-weapons program in
We must secure
1944,
these scientists for the rocketry program despite
resources
their
that
past.
could have
It is a matter of
equipped
national
nearly a
security.
dozen
And what are the
armored
morals?
divisions.
Work.
Allied
finally
intelligence, primarily led by British and Polish
Look at the
resistance
craftsmanship on the injector
networks,
head.
was
It's hard to
aware of
believe
the
this was built on the
V-weapons
ground. We
program
must secure the
early
telemetry
on,
data.
codenamed Operation Crossbow. The Allied forces faced three core challenges in countering the V-2: detection, interception, and understanding the technology. Detection was nearly impossible due to its supersonic speed and high trajectory, rendering conventional air defenses useless. Interception was deemed technically impossible. Therefore, the single most critical aspect became understanding the weapon's core technology and its production sites. The Allies mounted devastating bombing raids on Peenemünde, Operation Hydra, in 1943, slowing but not stopping development. However, the true advantage came from the ground. Polish resistance forces managed to capture and transport fragments of test rockets, including the crucial gyroscope and fuel pump assemblies. This physical evidence, combined with aerial reconnaissance, became the foundation for the Allied effort to demystify the V-2. The two main opposing forces in this unseen scientific war were the German physicists, represented by von Braun and the high-tech team, obsessed with the rocket's successful function, and the Allied intelligence ordnance teams, represented by Lieutenant Colonel Davis and Major General Jones, focused on the pragmatism of reverse engineering and mass production capacity. The immediate material contest lay in the sheer quantity of specialized labor. The V-2 consumed thousands of specialized German technicians, but the project also tragically relied heavily on slave labor, Dora Mittelbau, a human cost rarely factored into Cromler's cold calculations. While the V-2 represented a German monopoly on a breakthrough technology, the Allies were deploying their overwhelming intellectual and industrial scale to neutralize that advantage, meticulously gathering every scrap of information and every piece of metal from the impact sites. This clandestine scientific race was reaching its fever pitch, moving swiftly from fragments of metal to the complete understanding of the most dangerous secret of the war.
Strategic deployment of V-2 revealed the internal contradictions plaguing the Reich's war effort.
within the minds of the people.
Kammler's
Evaporated, leaving only a hollow
SS
despair.
wrestled control of the production from the Wehrmacht, prioritizing launch speed and concealment over logistical efficiency. This resulted in a chaotic supply chain. Ethanol and liquid oxygen were transported across the collapsing German railway network, often being diverted or destroyed before reaching mobile launch sites in the Netherlands and France. The reliance on specialized slave labor within the vast underground Mittelwerk factory proved both an ethical abyss and a fatal logistical bottleneck. The deliberate sabotage and poor health of the prisoners led to catastrophic failure rates and delayed production, which was meticulously hidden from the high command. Political infighting further hindered the V-2's effectiveness. Werner von Braun and his scientific team clashed constantly with Kammler over the technical development versus the immediate operational deployment. The lack of air cover and the overwhelming Allied aerial reconnaissance meant that the mobile launch teams, though designed for stealth, were systematically tracked. Allied intelligence, feeding information from the fragments and polished resistance reports, accurately predicted launch zones, leading to intensive bombing of transit points and suspected launch preparations. Operation Big Ben. This constant disruption meant that despite the technical marvel of the rocket itself, the entire delivery system was fatally flawed and consistently failed to deliver the promised psychological shock necessary for strategic change.
It was not the tank.
The
It was the
Führer's
flood.
demand for high-quality, complex, singular miracle weapons fundamentally misunderstood the nature
Sherman
of
becomes the ultimate
industrial
logic
total
bomb.
war,
A final
where mass
realization.
production and reliable logistics trumped individual technical superiority. The V-2, meant to be the strategic hammer, instead became a massive drain on the nation's remaining intellectual and material bloodstream. We were told we were building the future, the final answer to the bombing raids, but the reality in the tunnels was a continuous nightmare. My job was the turbine assembly,
In the end, the numbers
a
don't
piece
lie.
of
This
genius
wasn't a failure of will,
engineering,
but an industrial
demanding
collapse decades in the
precision
making.
to the micron. But the complexity was the trap. If one specialized
It's
bearing
finished.
failed,
Everything we
the
fought for,
entire
everything we
rocket
knew,
was
it's
useless.
gone, and I suppose-
And the spare
As demonstrated in the
3
Sherman
weeks
campaigns,
away.
the effective
If it
synchronization of
wasn't
armor and
already
infantry is the
bombed.
cornerstone of the combined arms legacy.
The Americans, they didn't build a flawless turbine. They built a simple, durable one they could stamp out in 1,000 pieces and replace in an hour.
Still here, after all
We
this time.
watched
Solid
their
as ever.
planes fly over our
Brings back
heads
memories,
almost
doesn't
daily. Our rockets were brilliant, yes, but they existed in isolation. Their rockets, even if crudely made, would exist in a relentless flood. I saw the sabotage among the prisoners, their small, desperate acts,
That's me.
a wrongly wired connector, a contaminated fuel valve.
It was not the tank.
It wasn't
was the
resistance. It was simple hopelessness. Our perfect machine was being defeated by
Sure.
the human
It is
spirit
the ultimate
and
logic
the
wrong.
reality
The
of
final
logistics.
realization of our failure.
Menzel's perspective reveals the self-defeating nature of German precision engineering under total war conditions.
Our mission wasn't to shoot down the V-2. That was physically impossible. Our mission was to steal the concept. The German error was assuming their rocket was inherently secure simply because of its complexity. They underestimated the tenacity of our Polish partners and the intellectual scale of our own engineering corps. When we received the
final
first
accounting reveals the
gyroscope
truth. Our
fragments,
spirit was
smuggled
willing.
out via
Our industrial
Sweden,
might was
we
found.
didn't try to replicate the German components. We analyzed the underlying principles.
I suppose
We
this is what
realized
progress
the
looks
war
like.
was
They built
accelerating
this new
toward
world and left us
missile
behind in the old
warfare,
one.
and we
The
needed
Sherman
that
campaign taught us the
fundamental
enduring lesson of the
knowledge.
combined arms doctrine.
Our
It is
objective
this legacy that
shifted
ensures
from
victory on the
immediate
battlefield.
defense to future mastery. We ran parallel teams, one reverse engineering the propulsion, another the guidance system, and a third, the most crucial, tracking the production and storage sites. Every fragment Kammler launched provided another data point, another piece of the puzzle. The psychological victory wasn't the V-2's initial terror. It was our ability to dismantle the very idea of German scientific exclusivity. Davis's account highlights the Allied strategic focus on future technology and intellectual
42.
appropriation.
The shelling stopped, but the silence...
The V-2 was an engineering marvel, but a logistical disaster. Our initial work was driven by panic. We had to know how to build a counterweapon. But the true breakthrough came when we realized the V-2 was built by hand, almost like a luxury car. It required specialized technicians, specialized tools, and specialized supply lines. When we captured the Peenemünde scientists led by von Braun, their designs confirmed our hypothesis: high precision, zero interchangeability. Our response, the development of the U.S. rocket program, was the American way: simplify, standardize, and scale. We aimed not for the V-2's flawed perfection, but for a simplified, reliable design that could be launched constantly, regardless of conditions. Their complexity was our final lesson, a lesson we immediately applied to our future missile programs to ensure American industrial might could sustain any future scientific conflict. Jones's perspective frames the V-2 as a negative technical lesson that fueled American long-term standardization. The V-2 gave us brief, false hope. We looked up and saw the future, a sign that German ingenuity could still win. But the ethical price was too high. The rocket was built on the backs of the desperate, Jews, political prisoners, Russian-captured soldiers who died assembling the very weapon meant to save our honor. The moral decay in the middlework factory was the true V-2 payload. It stripped the rocket of its moral legitimacy, even among those of us who hoped for salvation. The greatest tragedy was not the cost, but the fact that the secret, that the rockets were the embodiment of logistical chaos and human exploitation, was known only to a few. The moment the Allies captured the tunnels, they didn't just capture a facility, they captured the darkest moral dimension of the German war machine. The V-2, a supposed weapon of vengeance, became a monument to ethical suicide. Mueller's ethical viewpoint condemns the V-2 project based on its reliance on slave labor and its moral cost.
My commanders were fools. They only saw the immediate terror, the damage reports from London. They demanded quantity, quantity, quantity. But how do you explain the genius of the V-2's guidance system to a field marshal obsessed with gasoline cans? The Americans couldn't build this machine. They had to steal it. Our one true advantage was the complexity, the sheer intellectual gap. My frustration was seeing our engineers constantly pulled back to the front lines, our fuel constantly diverted to obsolete tanks, while the genius of the V-2 went unsupported. The only way to guarantee the weapon's success was to protect the scientists and the metalwork factory at any cost. I had to impose the SS's will, ensuring secrecy and labor discipline. because the Wehrmacht would have simply wasted the project. My final despair came not when the Americans arrived, but when I realized the knowledge, the complex, irreplaceable knowledge, was being appropriated by the enemy. They won not by building their own future, but by stealing ours and mass-producing it. That realization was the true defeat.
No, this isn't right.
The Allied counter-strategy moved beyond bombing launch sites to encompass a comprehensive intelligence and reverse engineering program. The captured fragments confirmed the V-2's reliance on ethanol and LOX fuel and a simple gyroscope for guidance. This allowed Allied scientists to rapidly prototype counter-technology, significantly reducing the initial gap. The most profound strategic twist was Operation Paperclip, the wholesale recruitment of German scientists, including von Braun, immediately after the collapse of the Reich. This acquisition of German intellectual capital was a strategic masterstroke, ensuring that the V-2's future was integrated into the American, not the Soviet sphere of influence. The V-2, meant to destroy the Allies, instead became the foundational design for the Saturn V rocket, the very vehicle that would eventually propel Americans to the moon. The Allied victory was complete. They defeated the weapon and appropriated the knowledge. The V-2 remains a profound symbol of the simultaneous terror and technological ambition of the 20th century. While militarily ineffective as a war-winning weapon, its launch against London marked the dawn of the space age and the era of ballistic missile warfare, permanently altering geopolitical stability. The rockets were a terror weapon that killed an estimated 9,000 civilians in the UK and Belgium. Yet their greater cost was the 20,000 slave laborers who died in the Mittelwerk tunnels manufacturing them. The V-2's primary legacy, however, is scientific. Its complexity provided the intellectual and technical blueprint for Cold War missile races and space exploration. The moral compromises made to achieve the V-2 ultimately defined the ethical debate surrounding modern technological warfare. The terrible beauty of the V-2, a work of scientific genius built on human suffering, cemented the reality that in total war, scientific knowledge, even when hidden, is a prize that will always be seized by the power of superior scale and logistics. The climax of the V-2 saga occurred not on the battlefield, but in the desolate wreckage of a test site known as Blaszki, Poland, in May 1944. This was the moment the years of painstaking intelligence gathering, from code-breaking at Bletchley Park to aerial photography, finally yielded physical proof. The rocket fragments recovered here proved the V-2 was not a conventional weapon, confirming the fears of Allied strategists. However, the true turning point was the realization that the entire guidance system could be reconstructed from the debris, thanks to the dedicated work of Polish resistance fighters who braved immense danger to map and recover critical components.
The recovery was a desperate gamble. Polish resistance forces learned of a complete test V-2 rocket that had failed and landed relatively intact near the Vistula River. Codenamed Operation Most 3, Bridge 3, the plan involved recovering the central gyroscope and fuel pump assemblies, the very heart of the missile's technological secret, from the heavily guarded German occupation zone. This audacious operation relied entirely on the courage of local Polish engineers who disassembled the complex components under the noses of the SS, created dummy pieces to replace them, and documented the blueprints. The subsequent technical analysis in London by teams including Dr. R.V. Jones led to the devastating conclusion for the Axis. The Allied scientists now understood the V-2's mechanism well enough to begin replicating its components and anticipating its trajectory flaws. The V-2's technological exclusivity, the source of Kammler's triumphal confidence, was shattered.
The information allowed the Allies to execute the double-cross system, feeding false bombing intelligence back to the Germans, convincing them that their rockets were overshooting London, when in fact they were hitting the target precisely. This critical intelligence deception caused the Germans to recalibrate their trajectory away from London, saving thousands of civilian lives. The true psychological advantage of the V-2, its unanswerable terror, was lost the moment the Allies understood its inner workings. This clandestine intellectual victory was the strategic turning point that negated the V-2's military value long before the Allied troops ever reached the tunnels of Middlework. The immediate consequence of Operation Most 3 was the strategic shift that culminated in the capture of the V-2 program's entire intellectual leadership. The advancing U.S. Army, specifically the 3rd Armored Division, discovered the entrance to the underground Middlework factory and its complex of slave labor camps in April 1945. This discovery was the physical manifestation of the scientific war's end. As the American troops liberated the surviving prisoners, they secured the vast network of tunnels that housed the assembly line and, more importantly, the storage of complete V-2 components. The high-stakes twist lay in Operation Paperclip. Before the Americans arrived, General Kammler and the SS leadership had desperately tried to dismantle the factory and execute the remaining intellectual leadership. However, Werner von Braun and his core team had made a calculated decision. They fled south, choosing to surrender to the American forces rather than the advancing Soviets, taking with them over 1,000 complete V-2 blueprints and essential technical documentation. This act was the final, devastating betrayal of the Axis war effort. The capture of von Braun and his team meant that the Allies did not just have fragments or reverse-engineered data, they had the complete, proprietary design package and the irreplaceable intellectual expertise to operate it. The despair among the remaining Axis commanders was absolute. General Wolfe, upon receiving the final intelligence report detailing the capture of both the Middlework facilities and the scientists, realized the total futility of the Wunderwaffe. The V-2, meant to guarantee German technological supremacy in the post-war world, was now the foundational design for the American missile program. The capture included 100 V-2 rockets that were immediately shipped to the United States for testing. The ultimate humiliation was complete. The Allies won the war on the ground, dismantled the technological engine, and acquired the scientific minds responsible, ensuring that the legacy of the most expensive weapon in German history would serve their victors.
This is the end of the road for me.
This intellectual and material appropriation was the crushing final act of the scientific war.
The analysis of the V-2 program's overall contribution to the German war effort shows a monumental strategic failure. The V-2 killed more people in its production, 20,000 slave laborers, than in its deployment, approximately 9,000 civilians. Its tactical deployment against cities lacked the strategic focus necessary to affect the industrial output or military cohesion of the Allies. However, its most profound failure was tactical. It diverted critical resources, fuel, engineers, precision manufacturing,
It was not the tanks.
away from conventional
flood.
weapons that could have strengthened the conventional German defense. The cost was immense and utterly disproportionate to its strategic yield. The diversion of 10% of Germany's 1944 steel output to V-weapons, a figure that appears frequently in post-war economic analysis, represents a critical misallocation that directly impacted the production of tanks, aircraft, and artillery, crucial for defensive warfare. The V-2, meant to be a technological bypass of Allied supremacy, instead became a monumental sinkhole for Germany's remaining capacity. The failure to protect the research sites and scientists, a failure rooted in Kammler's fanatical SS command prioritizing control over security, further ensured that the entire intellectual prize would fall into Allied hands.
I suppose this is where our
The
story
true
ends.
strategic damage was the loss of the future. The long-term impact of the V-2 extends far beyond the battlefield. The rocket became the physical embodiment of the American industrial system's ability to not only destroy the Axis, but to appropriate and scale their most valuable technological secrets. The V-2 provided the foundational knowledge for the Cold War missile race and the space age. Wernher von Braun and his captured team formed the core of the American space program, working first on intercontinental ballistic missiles and later designing the Saturn V rocket that took Americans to the moon. The V-2, therefore, was the first successful intercontinental delivery system, a dark symbol of scientific achievement built upon moral compromise. The societal impact was equally profound. The moral vacuum and human cost of the middlework factory forced a harsh reckoning with the ethics of military scientific ambition. The V-2 remains a chilling reminder that scientific breakthroughs, divorced from ethical oversight and sound strategic thinking, can hasten ruin rather than guarantee salvation. The terrible beauty of the V-2, a work of scientific genius built on human suffering, cemented the reality that in total war, scientific knowledge, even when hidden, is a prize that will always be seized by the power of superior scale and logistics.